Hello, welcome everybody. I'll give people a minute or two to go ahead and log in, and then we'll go ahead and get started in just a moment. So my name is Kate Schwanhauser, and I'm the Special Events Manager here at Food and Water Watch. And I want to thank you all for coming to our Livable Future Live event today. So before we get started, I'll just share a couple of quick Zoom reminders as everyone's getting logged in. First, the chat box is open, so go ahead and use that to introduce yourself and share where you're joining from today. That's also where we'll share some links during the event, so keep an eye out there for some of the resources that we have for you. If you need to turn on closed captioning to add subtitles to your screen, click on the live transcript button that you see in your Zoom toolbar to turn those on. We are also trying to save time for Q&A at the end of our discussion. So if you have questions for our speakers, you can use the Q&A box to send those in. And finally, we're recording today's event, so you can watch that later or share it with anyone else. All right, so we'll give people another minute or two to join, but I wanted to share a quick update about Livable Future Live. I know many of you join us here every month for our discussions. So just a heads up that next month we are taking a pause from Livable Future Live, but instead we are hosting Against All Odds on September 29th. And this is our annual benefit. And it's a hybrid event, so you can join us virtually like you are today, or in person in New York City for a reception. And at the event, you'll hear from organizers and activists who are on the front lines of our fight for healthy food, clean water, and a livable climate. We'll put a link in the chat where you can learn more about this event and how to get signed up. And then in October, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled Livable Future Live programming with the discussion on the environmental impacts of cryptocurrency and crypto mining, specifically looking at New York as a case study where there's been some really important legislative action taking place. So stay tuned for an email with a sign-up link for that event in the coming weeks. All right, so now today we'll turn to our topic of breaking the cycle of drought and wildfire. I know that this is a really heavy topic and I appreciate you all making space for it today. I grew up in California and most of my family still lives there. And so, they are fortunate that the extent of their impact from periods of drought is, a yard that's turned to dirt because they don't want to waste water on keeping it green. They've never had to be evacuated from a fire being too close to home, but it seems like every year now they tell me about how bad the air quality is getting, and there's days or weeks where they're not able to leave the house. And, it's sad that that's considered lucky. There are families that don't have access to water at all. There are families who are dealing with extreme health impacts from the smoke and poor air quality. And, most sadly of all, families who have been evacuated or who have lost homes or loved ones. And we can't have this become our new normal where we're constantly setting records for new levels of drought or heat or intensity of wildfires. And it makes me really grateful to see so many of you here today who are joining us for this conversation, to learn more, to come together to understand it better and learn how you can get involved. So thank you all so much for being here. So to set the stage before I introduce our panelists, record-breaking droughts have forced communities to grapple with water scarcity. And as those drought conditions become more extreme, drier landscapes and hotter temperatures caused by climate change are contributing to a higher chance of wildfires. And so Food and Water Watch and our allies are working to stop this problem at the source, the fossil fuel industry and industrial agriculture. Both are some of the biggest contributors to climate change, and both use and misuse massive amounts of water. So, we won't be able to fix this overnight, but we know the root causes and we know what needs to be done to make progress toward a safer, healthier future. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'll introduce our panelists and we'll dive right in. So we're joined today by Connor Everts, who is the Executive Director of the Southern California Watershed Alliance. He's also chair of the Public Officials for Water and Environmental Reform and is an elder advisor to the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water and is involved with many other organizations working to protect water resources for generations to come. We're also joined by Mark Schlossberg, who is Food and Water Watch's Managing Director of Research and Litigation. And over his time with Food and Water Watch, he's helped launch our national campaign to ban fracking, has led numerous campaigns in California, and leads a team of researchers who have produced some of the eye-opening reports that we'll be sharing today. And finally, Tomas Rebecki is joining us from Ventura, California. He is Food and Water Watch's Central Coast Organizing Manager, and he mobilizes grassroots support to shut down fossil fuel projects and put California on a path to transition to renewable energy. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I appreciate you all being here. We've got a lot to talk about, so I'm just going to go ahead and dive right on in. So Connor, I'll start with you, and I know that this is a big question, but I'll ask you if you could try to sum it up in a few minutes. How is water currently regulated or not regulated in California? And how are resources allocated between industrial agriculture and private use by local residents? Like I said, I know that's a big question to start with.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Water in California is as simple or as complex as you want to make it. We have water rights and water quality traditionally regulated by what's called the State Water Resources Control Board out of Sacramento, and there's 9 regional boards, some of them actually matching the watersheds that they serve across the state. We have not had, in the way that we think that we lead the country in trends, perhaps fads, but sometimes also progressive legislation, and water, we're way behind. We were the last state to have any groundwater regulation, behind even Texas. What we passed in the midst of the last, and I don't like the word drought, I want to be clear with that. I like climate change because droughts end and this is not ending. But the last time we had this level of dryness, 2013, 2014, 2015, we started a groundwater legislation called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and then individual groundwater sustainable agencies across the state who put together plans. It's a good idea, but it doesn't get implemented until 2040. So in the interim, there's a lot of consternation by Big Ag and others that their water is going to be limited. However, we don't fully either meter or monitor all the groundwater. We don't notice the groundwater is low and subsidence until we actually found out through satellites it's as low as 100 feet. I'm a tall person. I'm 6'6", and I can reach up, over almost 8.5 feet roughly. That is where telephone poles or utility poles are in parts of the southern San Joaquin Valley where they've overtapped their groundwater that much. Mm-hmm. So, the simple answer to the question is we're getting there. We're getting there slowly, and we're getting there in a reaction to kind of a slow process where individual agencies, and there are thousands of them across the state, are essentially their own fiefdoms with their own elected board of directors and very little oversight. Lastly, the question was actually how do we deal with essentially privatizing industrial water? Traditionally, we haven't separated those sectors and gone after them. Because we're not measuring water correctly, it's really hard to deal with larger agriculture. When we slow down the deliveries of water from reservoirs, then they immediately start overtapping reservoirs, which has an impact with people who draw on shallow water for drinking water. Yeah. Industry usually gets the idea, industry itself, that they need to save water, and they do it based on a bottom line. And industrial, institutional, and other sources are pushed by local regulations as much as anything else. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wonder, Mark, if you want to just share quickly, how, some of the statistics that you know about how industrial agriculture is using water compared to actual residents.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the point that Connor makes about groundwater regulation is so critical, because that's where a huge source of water that's being used for agriculture comes from, and also because we tap that groundwater and the levels are falling, it makes it so that people who rely on well water for their drinking water can't get access to it. California, 80% of our water in California goes for agricultural uses, much of that for industrial agriculture. And if you look at just almonds and pistachios and other tree nuts, that's 20% of that agricultural water. Those are high value products that are used to make some people a lot of money. They're usually grown on very large scale, and 58% of them are exported abroad, essentially exporting California water to other places that may actually have wetter climates. It's interesting that Connor talked about the 2014. We're actually in a very long period of dry that goes back 20 years. And if you look at what happened between 2010 and now, the amount of almonds and pistachios and other tree nuts being grown has actually increased 78%. So we're in this very dry period. We're in a dry period that's being impacted and accelerated through climate change. And yet we're doubling down on industrial agriculture that is very water intensive, rather than growing crops that are necessary to feed people and that are more appropriate for our climate. Just one other area that is very much brings this point home is alfalfa. Now, alfalfa is usually largely used to feed cows on factory farms and other agricultural uses. The country of Saudi Arabia is dry and has said you cannot grow alfalfa in Saudi Arabia. So there's actually a Saudi company that's is in the United States, has bought up some operation that has senior water rights and is growing alfalfa and then exporting it back to Saudi Arabia to feed cows on factory farms over there. This is insanity, and we need policies that bring this that rein this in, that say to these that basically say you can't use these we can't abuse our water. We've got to have agriculture that makes sense in our climate, and water should be managed for people as a human right, not for large corporate profits.
Yeah, thank you. Those statistics are crazy to hear, just how much water is used in this way. Tomas, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about, what impact does that have on residents when industrial agriculture is using up so much of the water supply?
Right. So this mismanagement comes back to hurt people the most. And these people are usually in underserved, low-income communities. And under California state law, every Californian actually has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water. But unfortunately, even with that on the books, we have over 1 million people, and it's been like this for a while, that don't have access to that affordable, clean, safe drinking water. It's getting closer and closer to 2 million every year. We don't do anything else. So on top of that, it's not that they don't have access to that. Over 920,000 people face increased risk of cancer and liver and kidney problems because they get water from systems that don't meet the standards necessary. So coming from a father that have 2 young children, it's scary to think that some of the water coming out of our tap could be hurting us for the long run. So like I said, this is a problem that is widespread throughout California, but over 2/3 of them are in low income and disadvantaged communities. So the communities that are getting impacted the most by it. So many other effects of climate change are also losing their access to clean, affordable drinking water. And in the most rich state, in the wealthiest country in the world, this is unacceptable. So these are the true day-to-day impacts that these policies are having on us.
Yeah, thank you for sharing just, the human impact of this problem. And, I know we've been talking primarily about California thus far, but, unfortunately, this is not unique to California. Mark, I know we've done some research on, how these issues are impacting people in states like Oregon and New Mexico. Is there, a little bit of information you want to share on that?
Sure. Yeah, the issues we're talking about in California are not unique to California, as you mentioned. These are issues that kind of permeate the American West. Oregon, we're working with a whole coalition to try and stop the expansion of factory farms in that state. There are currently 11 megadairies in Oregon, a state, by the way, which people may think, oh, Oregon, there's rain, but the Central and Eastern Oregon are experiencing really significant dry periods. And yet there's 11 megadairies in the state that have over 2,500 cows apiece. This is a big problem, both for water and for the climate. Those 11 megadairies produce the climate equivalent of 318,000 passenger vehicles. So that's not insignificant, significant driver of climate change. And at the same time, they consume lots of water. 8.2 million gallons of water a day, for example, go towards just the drinking and washing of the cows. That's not including the water that's used to grow the feed and things like that. That is the same amount of water for 124,000 Oregonians. So it's a lot of water, and it's driving the climate crisis. At the same time, a lot of these dairies are placed in rural and largely Latino communities. So there's environmental justice components to this as well. And we know that because of the climate crisis, which is being driven in part by factory farms, fossil fuel industry, et cetera, that creating more dry conditions, which is leading to wildfires. And of course, Oregon experienced massive wildfires last year, and this has become a more common occurrence throughout the American West. In New Mexico, you have one of the driest states in the entire country. Also a huge dairy state. These large mega dairy factory farms are really helping to drive the climate crisis, pollute water, and a lot of times are being placed in places that are highly water impacted. So this makes no sense on many levels. Almost every cow that's in, every dairy cow in New Mexico is on a factory farm. The average size is 3,000 cows, which is enormous, consuming 32 million gallons of water a day. And there's also the same thing happening in California. We've got 1.7 million cows on large factory farms in the state of California as well. Again, drawing on limited water resources and helping to drive the climate crisis at the same time, contributing to water pollution through the large amounts of manure that are generated. So these are industries that really need to be taken on if we're going to be serious about addressing the climate crisis, the water crisis, and our sustainable future.
Thank you. And for those who are interested in learning more, I believe we just put some links in the chat to some fact sheets that we have specifically on these issues. So we've been talking primarily so far about, factory farms and how they play a big role, but I also want to turn to the impacts of the fossil fuel industry. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly play a short 2-minute video, and then we'll return to the panel for your thoughts. So let me go ahead and cue that up.
In recent years, California wildfires have gotten bigger and more destructive, nearly wiping whole communities off the map. But it wasn't always like this. Historically, wildfires have naturally ebbed and flowed with California's seasons. Indigenous people have practiced cultural burning to help with land management for millennia. Their traditional knowledge teaches us that fire returns nutrients to the soil and helps create important wildlife habitat. Fire is a critical part of California's ecosystems. So how did things get so out of control? Colonization outlawed indigenous land practices and created a new extractive economy that runs on fossil fuels. When we drill, refine, and burn fossil fuels, we release toxic emissions and trap more heat in the atmosphere. This causes the climate crisis, which creates hotter and drier conditions in California and fuels our massive wildfires. From the millions forced to evacuate or breathe toxic smoke from fires to those that live near toxic oil wells, fossil fuels endanger Californians' health and safety at every stage. Despite our green image, we're still one of the largest oil producers in the nation. It's time to address the root cause of the problem: extracting and burning fossil fuels. Governor Newsom can lead the way. Let's stop permitting dangerous fossil fuel projects and support communities and workers to build a future powered by good union jobs and renewable energy. Only then will we see serious progress and stop fueling the flames of California's climate-driven wildfires.
All right. So that is a video that was put together by the Last Chance Alliance, which is a coalition of organizations, including Food and Water Watch, who are working on these issues. So I'll open up the floor to our panel to see, your thoughts on how the fossil fuel industry is contributing to the intensity of wildfires. And Connor, your thoughts as well on how, wildfires are impacting our landscapes and how that impacts water quality.
Sure. I mean, it's hard to imagine the scale of the wildfires. We keep having the largest one ever in the last few years. But from friends I know who've been lucky enough, the fires have gone from 50 feet, 75 feet from their homesteads up in the foothills, to another who lived next to the Dixie Fire, which burnt out much of the watershed in the kind of northeast corner of California, where a huge amount of water sits in these high meadow sponges and runs down the large Feather River Canyon into the Sacramento, where then, in our giant plumbing system runs through Lake Orville. People might have heard of that lake because they had to evacuate 180,000 people when it looked like the earthen dam might break. All that's been changed with wildfires because there's no trees to retain the water, to hold it back, to stop debris flows, which can be deadly. It's having a huge impact also on water quality because the runoff has changed. And everything that burns, including toxic materials that are in buildings, end up as part of that. So you have to drive through it to understand it. You have to see how slowly the forests are coming back. I've heard in parts of New Mexico and parts of Southern California, when those forests burn, they're not going to come back. But you also have to realize with this extended dryness that we have an insect infestation that just creates a long gray burn line at a certain elevation, and it's all tinder waiting to go. So that's why we keep hearing about more, bigger, and the smoke impacts, not directly on the water, although a lot of the ash and everything falls on our reservoirs and waterways. But the smoke impacts are having a huge health impact all the way to urban communities down on the coast, sometimes hundreds of miles away.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll open the floor again and see if Tomas or Mark, if there's anything that you want to share about how fossil fuels are contributing to this cycle.
Yeah, Mark, if you want to go for it. I can just talk about my own personal experience here in Ventura County, California. For people outside of the state, we're just north, we border LA, and the Washington Post actually did a study 2 years ago that we are the fastest warming county in the whole United States over the past 100 years. And we're also the third largest oil producing county too here in California, even though we think we're a green state, we produce a lot of fossil fuels. So all this increased climate change and wildfires, like Connor was saying, every year we're having the biggest wildfire on record. Back in 2017, myself, my family, we had to evacuate in the middle of the night with my 3-month-old daughter. So it's like, it's the craziest feeling in the world, not knowing if you're going to come back to your own home, just seeing the impacts on your own community and your family. It's something that you don't want anybody else to go through. So this is, yeah, it's getting out of control. And every year we're seeing it more intense. We're seeing less and less water in our reservoirs. We're seeing our landscapes drier, and the effects of afterwards here in Ventura County. A couple months after those worst wildfires, we had the Montecito mudslides after a huge rain event. So there's just this huge trickle down effect of these wildfires, of fossil fuel pollution. And at the end of the day, like I said, our communities, the community I live in is over 70% Latino, and we live right next to the oil field. Air pollution is increasing with these wildfires already on top of the pollution that we face day to day. So it's really a feedback loop that's getting out of control that we really need to do something about now.
I think when you talk about fossil fuel, what is the fossil fuel industry doing to drive the climate crisis? There's the burning and extraction of fossil fuels, which is quite literally driving the climate crisis. But then there's also the spending of massive amounts of money in our political system, on lobbying, and on political campaigns, et cetera, and really putting forward greenwashed so-called solutions that are going to keep us hooked on fossil fuels, that are going to continue to exacerbate this crisis. So that means things like carbon capture, things like offsets, things like hydrogen, things that are reliant in very large part on continued use and production of fossil fuels, which is going to just keep us on this road. So we need to very much address the water abuse of the fossil fuel industry. We didn't really totally talk about that, but they consume large amounts of water and have also dumped wastewater into our aquifers, polluting our water, but also the pollution that the industry has had on our political system. And that's why all of us need to come together, organize to fight back against this stuff.
Thank you. And thanks so much, Tomas, for sharing your story. I'm so sorry to hear that happened. And that's just, that's why we need to be working towards these solutions so that that never happens to you or anyone else in your community again. So that's really one of the purposes of today's conversation is, to talk about how we can move forward and address climate change to prevent these worsening drought conditions and to prevent worsening wildfire risks. And so there are systemic changes that we can work toward that will have a big impact on our future. So I want to turn the conversation a little bit in that direction now. So maybe starting with water management. For example, Connor, last week, Governor Newsom proposed a new plan for water management that included more desalination plants and more tunnel and dam projects. And I know that there are some concerns with that. So could you tell us a little bit about that proposal and maybe where we should be focusing our efforts?
Sure. I'd be happy to. That was really kind of shocking. It was a plan to do a plan with 2 weeks left in the legislature, asking the legislature to move ahead with that and killing the deadline for the Diablo Canyon power plant, which was due to be shut down with the agreement of the utility. So that's when you end up doing legislation like that at the last minute, you often end up with something called gut and amend, where you take another bill, strip it out, and put information that you want in, and they get very little time for either review or discussion or these concerns. So the concerns are simply desalination is a good example of maladaptation. It uses more energy than anything, even than the amount of energy it takes to pump water over the Tehachapi Mountains in the southern end of our agricultural area, which is flat, into Southern California. That's the biggest water lift. It may have been surpassed, but it is the biggest water lift of water in the world. It takes a huge amount of energy. So anything we can do to decrease that water moving there, that same water would come through a conveyance or canal system called the Peripheral Canal that was voted down by a vote of the people in '82. It's on about its 7th iteration and name, trying to still push it through. And we already have 1,400 dams in the state. Building more dams doesn't supply more water. In climate change, what we need to be doing is putting water underground where it won't evaporate, not transporting it hundreds of miles and pumping it. 19% of all the energy in the state of California is used to pump, transport, and treat water to start with. And someone mentioned in the chat, which I couldn't answer, is that, to be clear, I said high meadow sponges is the area between the Cascade Mountains and the Sierra Mountains that captures so much of our water and then releases it down. But the other thing was recharge. We do groundwater recharge. My mentor, Dorothy Green, started a group called Unpave LA, which is now called the Council for Watershed Health. A lot of agencies have what they call spreading grounds to spread the water out. We're looking at taking the LA River out of a channel for flood control and looking at places where it could actually recharge and go back in the ground. Orange County takes treated wastewater. It's treated 4 times, including with membranes and UV light, and treated as it's filtered through the ground to actually recharge their groundwater as well. And we have a lot of stormwater programs that are doing that, but we need to do a lot more of that. We're looking at flooding some agricultural areas so they can provide recharge as well, but we're a long ways from balancing the amount of water we take out with the water that is available, and climate change has changed that whole baseline.
Thank you. And I wonder if either Mark or Connor, if you have any thoughts on, what's being done or needs to be done to stop industrial agriculture from monopolizing our water, since as you both shared at the beginning, they are the biggest user of our water resources.
I'll just jump in, and Connor add something if I'm missing it. But I think several things need to happen. I mean, as Connor mentioned, the groundwater regulations that we have don't go into place until 2040. That needs to be dramatically sped up. We should place a moratorium on factory farms, expansion of tree nuts, and we need to begin to have a real conversation and roll back some of these uses. We have the oil and gas industry. California is the 7th largest oil producing state in the country. It uses a lot of water and helps drive the climate crisis. We shouldn't be using water for these purposes. We need to stop all new drilling permits and begin to move California off of oil. So all these things need to happen. And I think that in order to make them happen, we really need political leadership from the governor. And that's one of the things that I think was most disappointing about his water proposals that Connor touched on, was at the same time that they doubled down on industrial solutions like dams and energy intensive desalination, there hasn't been really any discussion about how are we going to take on these industries that are really abusing large amounts of water, and how do we rapidly, not by 2045 or whatever, but how do we rapidly by 2030 move California off of oil production and move us to 100% renewable energy? So those are, which would also save lots of water. So that's the direction where I think that we need to be going, not doubling down on industrial solutions and industry things like carbon capture and storage and programs like that.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Mark said, and it's a good point that we've got these long deadlines, because the governor's plan also was looking at 2040, and we need 10% more water because we're going to lose that much supply. I think that's optimistic, actually, but we've seen the changes with our snowpack. We will also have times of extreme floods or mega floods, or what they call an arc flood, where the combination of factors and the changing currents in the warming ocean because of climate change will create these huge floods, more than we've seen in history, and we have to be prepared for that. But if we just did mandatory urban water conservation, we could easily save the 10% right away. We're doing it because we've enforced it on one of our water supplies in Southern California, and those areas that have been asked to do it mandatorily, as we have in the past, have easily reached it, surpassed it in areas. So it's not difficult. It's just a sense of priorities, and it's a sense of getting on that we're deep in the 21st century, and climate change has already happened to us, and we have to respond to it. We have to think of things that'll be immediate responses, cost effective, benefit communities, and make drinking water a priority in the midst of all of this.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree. And I know that there is a lot of great work being done on the organizing front to, try to make that a priority. So Tomas, I wonder if you could share a little bit about what organizing efforts you're doing, or that Food and Water Watch is doing in California, and how we're pressuring Governor Newsom to take action and be a leader on these issues.
Exactly. Nothing's going to happen unless we push and speak out and speak truth to power. And that's what we've been doing at Food and Water Watch since we started organizing here in California. And we are actually one of the founders of a statewide alliance called Last Chance Alliance. It's over 800 plus groups that are fighting for our three main goals: are getting Governor Newsom to stop all new fossil fuel projects, creating health and safety buffer zones between oil wells and homes and schools, because we know that those people are impacted the most, just like my own community here in Ventura. And and we're talking about phasing out too, not just stopping, but phasing out, because we need to be getting off of fossil fuels right away. And like we said, we've been pushing Governor Newsom because we have this facade that we're the greenest state and Newsom's doing so well. And the thing is, we can't feed into that. So we have to keep pushing for what we want. And thanks to a lot of the pressure that we've been putting on Newsom since he's been in office, we've got a setbacks regulation being worked on right now. We believe and we know that he has the power to do all this stuff himself, but he keeps deflecting to the legislator. So we have to keep focusing back on Newsom, keeping that pressure on him to do the right thing, because we've seen it in the past. So that when we put enough pressure and call him out, he will move, because he, just like everyone else, every other politician has an ego, and he has high aspirations to run for president. So through Last Chance Alliance, we do strategic actions during comment periods, because really we need to speak out, and especially voices from people that are impacted the most move legislators the most. As we saw here in Ventura County, we were one of the first counties and municipalities in the nation to create half-mile setbacks between oil and gas wells before California even did that. And it was because we continue to show up at hearings, speaking out, writing letters to the editor. And your own personal story and your own voice is the strongest thing that you have right now. And we need to come together in coalition at critical moments to make sure we're pushing the right people. So that's what we do within our coalition, within our organization. So just keep looking out for either our rallies, our comment periods, ways to send in, other ways and other tactics that we can keep that pressure up, because nothing's going to happen unless we keep speaking truth to power like we've been doing.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I love what you just shared about how, it really is up to all of us to get involved and use our voices and really make sure that our elected officials hear from us. And so those are some great ways and examples of what's happening in California. I also want to ask you, Mark, if you could maybe share a little bit for people who are joining us from outside of California. We're also putting pressure on President Biden to declare a climate emergency, and there are other national initiatives that we're working on. So could you talk a little bit about what a climate emergency would mean if Biden does declare that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of activity going on at the federal level around climate and fossil fuels. And this is actually a really critical time for everybody to be involved in pressuring not just President Biden, but also the members of Congress. Now, Congress just passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which contained many provisions that deal with climate, some of which are not very good, like support for carbon capture and storage. But paired with that legislation was a deal that Schumer said he made with Manchin to pass so-called permitting reform. What this would do is essentially fast track fossil fuel projects at a time we need to be moving off of fossil fuels. And the vision is that this legislation would be paired with some must-pass legislation like a continuing resolution to keep the government funded. This is a critical time for everybody to be calling their members of Congress, their senators, and the president to say that this deal can't stand. There's nothing that mandates that this happen. We can stop this. If the members of Congress decide to stand up and say we're not going to abide by a bill that fast tracks fossil fuel projects, it will not go forward. But we need to create that pressure and that environment that will force that bill to not that proposed bill to not go anywhere. At the same time, we need President Biden to use his executive authority. He has a tremendous amount of executive authority. We need him to use it to stop fossil fuel projects. Declaring a climate emergency will unlock authorities that he will have to, for example, stop some exports of fossil fuels. We also need him to use his executive authority to reject things like new pipelines, et cetera, through his various agencies. So there's a lot that the president can do. There were some provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act that do take us in a not great direction. But there are opportunities for us to pressure the president to take some strong action and to also stop this really, really terrible package that will fast track fossil fuels. And I know there's going to be a link that's going to be put in the chat for how people can take action on that. We need to all come together to stop that across all the environmental community. It's very important.
Awesome, thank you. And yes, we did just share 2 links in the chat. One is so that you can urge President Biden to declare a climate emergency, and the other is to tell your members of Congress to stop this pipeline permitting side deal that Mark was just telling us about. So make sure that you check those out, make sure that you send those messages, and make sure that our elected officials hear from us. All right, so we have a little bit of time now for some audience questions. And there were a number of questions that were submitted in advance and a number that are coming in through the Q&A box now as we're live. So we'll go through a couple of those. So, one question that we got a lot of different iterations of, so I'll try to sort of consolidate that into one, but a lot of people are asking, the factory farm industry, the fossil fuel industry, they're very entrenched, they're very well-funded organizations. So, how do we overcome that? How do we overcome, a government that is sometimes working to support those industries because of the lobbying power that they have?
I'm happy to take a shot at this one, and then maybe Tomas can add something from his extensive work in Ventura County and other counties throughout California. The only way that we're going to be able to beat back the power of the fossil fuel interests is by coming together and actually being engaged. And I'm glad that you all are on this call, because that shows that you are engaged. We need to engage more people. We need to recruit more people into this movement, and we need to continue to build strong and more diverse coalitions. And we know that when we do that, we can win. We've seen this through various campaigns that you all have been part of with us over the many years. We've seen this in our campaign to ban fracking in New York and Maryland. We've seen this in our campaigns to stop fossil fuel projects at the state and local level. It's only happened when we've been able to come together with large, diverse coalitions, engage lots of people, individual people, everyday people, our friends, our neighbors, into this political process. And that's how we're going to be able to do it. But it's going to take all of us, all of you, and many more of us. So, after you get off this call, maybe you can also, share the recording of this with a few friends and get more people involved. We all need to be engaged in this process, but we can win when we do.
Yeah, you said it perfect. Just like Mark was saying, like literally, like my experience too. When I first met Women Water Watch, we were fighting the fossil fuel industry in my own backyard in my home county, and we were able to ban fracking and all new oil wells, despite being outspent by millions of dollars. It's because we had the people power and we had the truth on our side, and we went door to door. Like my favorite saying is, we couldn't beat them dollar for dollar, but we can beat them door to door by talking to our friends, talking to our neighbors, getting people involved. Because at the end of the day, they can't convince us to poison ourselves. We just need to inform our community, inform our neighbors, build these coalitions that are really, because we're stronger together, that are going to get the job done. So it takes a lot of time, because even when you do have these victories, there's always setbacks. These are the most powerful industries in the world with billions of dollars. So they're going to be suing. So it's a long game, but it's getting involved and bringing everyone to the table is how we're going to win this.
Awesome. Thank you. That's super inspiring to hear. I hope that gets everybody on this call fired up to take action, to get involved in any way that you can. All right, let's take another question. So this is from Lynn, and it's about, what should be done to support health rights of agricultural workers who are on the front lines of heat, fire, or climate risks. And maybe Connor, for you as well, since I know you're part of the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water, how can we make sure that frontline communities who are feeling the worst impacts of drought and lack of water access are included and supported in this work?
Yeah, one of the great ironies and one of the missing links in California with water is that fresh, clean drinking water goes right by people working in the fields who don't have access to it. They're reliant on wells that may be polluted, shallow wells that are polluted with nitrates and fertilizers, arsenic, other things that are happening that they have no control over. So certainly having access to both water and sanitation, which we said is that human right to water was still a big challenge. There's third world conditions still in the state. Also, workers shouldn't be out there, as we've all seen them. You see them covered up like they're on Mars with every piece. It's not the dust, they're often sprayed upon when they're working. They're exposed and shouldn't be working in conditions that are getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And they shouldn't be exposed when you're not able to breathe because the smoke conditions are getting so bad. Because a lot of these agricultural valleys are low and flat, there's an inversion with the heat. And so you can see the smoke or the pesticides or whatever's in the air just kind of sitting low, right where people are stooped over and working all day in long, long hours in piecemeal work. So all of those take, that connection between working on environmental justice and working with local community groups and organizations, and some traditional ones like United Farm Workers, and supporting those people in frontline communities. And a lot of them have organized around water itself and are working with to build the capacity to have access to clean water, get elected to their local water boards, have a real voice in making change, because they're seeing the real impacts, from blue babies to other problems because of cancer clusters, to just not even having enough water for to wash your hands during COVID, for sanitation. While meanwhile, there's huge green areas of either golf courses or new almond orchards pumping down 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet to pull water up. There's just this huge inequity we have to deal with, and I think that's one of the priority problems we have to deal with. Then on the flip side, we haven't talked about it, but the impact for frontline communities to have access to sustainability in terms of fish and food, whether it's from rivers or from the ocean, has been impacted greatly by reduced flows and by pollution issues, and by warming temperatures in the rivers and the way we release water hot, often for agriculture, for some crops like rice, and don't make the priority for food or not just people, but everything that inhabits and uses water. And the last one, I think, I'm sorry, there's so many links here, but the tribal consultation and dealing with the indigenous that were here first and that use the resources properly, that needs to be yet another priority. It's in place that they are sovereign and we need to deal with them that way, but and we're beginning to form those coalitions, but they often have priority rights to water, and those should be respected as well.
Just quickly to add on to that too. Yeah, this is definitely a very question close to my family too. My parents both grew up working in the agricultural industry. My dad, Italian, grew up in the Central Valley, working on farms. My grandpa was part of the Bracero movement. They came here as farm workers, and just like Connor said, as a kid, she would run outside and they'd see the planes spraying on them. They didn't know the dangers of that. But we've come a long ways, but we still have a long ways to go. We have some good regulations that are on the books about access to fresh water for farm workers, 80 degrees of shade when it's hot, cool down breaks, and then training to prevent it. But still, we've had over 815 deaths from workers over the past 20 years here in the US. And we got to make sure that these laws that are on the books are actually enforced. That happens all the time here in Ventura County. You'll see on a hot day that they don't have these shaded areas and these tents. So it's one thing to get these regulations, but just to make sure that they're getting enforced and to make sure that we're looking out for the people that are feeding us and doing the hardest work that we have in our nation. So yeah, there's a lot to do. We're doing some of it here in California, but the biggest part is making sure that it's enforced and that those rules are actually applied so we don't have any more deaths.
Thanks so much for sharing all of that work that's being done, and the ways that we can make sure that these types of regulations are strengthened so that we really truly are protecting people in our communities. We've also gotten a couple of questions, since we've been talking about needing to, move off fossil fuels, move towards renewable energy, so what would that mean in terms of, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, the amount of water that it would save to move to renewables, and what we can do to help promote that renewable energy transition?
Yeah, I'll jump in with, that's a very broad question, and we could talk about that for a whole webinar on that topic. But yeah, in essence, we need to keep as much fossil fuels in the ground as possible, and we need to rapidly move to 100% renewable energy. The scientists, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, other scientists are very clear that we need to, it's code red for humanity. We need to stop using fossil fuels. So how are we going to do that? And what does that mean for water? Well, specifically for water, renewable energy uses much less water than fossil fuel energy. There'd be like 99% savings just on the energy, on the water consumption. But also you would have the industry not polluting our water. So it also help in that way as well. In California, there's a process going on right now before the California Air Resources Board, which is an agency that Governor Newsom appoints most of the members to. And they're basically like laying out what is going to be our approach to climate change over the next several years in the state of California. And that's going to be, a lot of people are looking to California, outside of California, for like leadership and view California as an environmental leader. It's going to be really important that California, that Governor Newsom uses that opportunity to really move aggressively. What they're talking about right now is a lot of what I mentioned earlier. They're talking about net zero by 2045. They're talking about embracing things like carbon capture and fantasies like direct air capture, rather than doing most of the reductions with direct emission reductions, and very rapidly phasing out our fossil fuel industry in California. So we need to do that in California, and we need to do that nationally. That's why, the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of people are talking about it as the biggest climate bill, but it needs to be looked at as like the first very small step in many things that need to happen, because there's a lot of things in that bill that don't cut it, like opening up more land, more area off the Gulf for permits and carbon capture. So we need to, as a movement, organize very directly around the question of reducing and eliminating fossil fuels, stopping all new permits and all new infrastructure, and rapidly moving to 100% renewable energy. And to do that, we need to build that political power. And as I said, we need to engage more people in the political process. We need to make sure that our legislators, from the local level to the federal government, hear very directly that this is not an issue of compromise. This is an issue of conscience and of our future survivability. And we need to have, real solutions that conform with the science. And scientists have been very clear about it. We need our elected officials to listen to them. And as citizens, as peoples in this country, we need to come together and make sure that our elected officials listen to about what is the reality and take action that conforms to it.
Thank you. All right, we have another great question from Joanne. How do we talk about this so ordinary people will listen instead of going numb from the scary truth? Because we've been talking about, this is a really intense topic. So I'll ask you that question. How can we talk about this in a way that keeps people engaged? And maybe I'll also add on my own question, what gives you all hope to keep fighting this fight so that you don't feel that type of paralysis?
Connor, I think you're muted, but you're talking.
Okay, there we go. I'll start and unmute. In terms of water, there is far more we can do to become far more efficient, far less wasteful, and reuse both stormwater, rainwater, and even wastewater. There's examples around the world. We're actually doing a lot of that. I mean, I'm impressed by what we're doing. It's just the process of it is so slow, and it's not moving as quickly as this aridification, as they like to call, this endless dryness we're in, nor are we prepared for the floods where we could recapture and reuse more of the water. So, while fish are going extinct, forests are depleted, we still have an incredible amount of natural resources in California that other places don't have. We have wonderful soil if we take care of it. And if we combine those things, we wouldn't have put ourselves in the crisis we find now. The reservoirs were full in 2017 and 2019 into 2020. We then continue to drain them down, thinking things will be as they were in the past, and we have to plan for the future. So I have great hope. And if I wasn't doing this, I would be discouraged. And I would be discouraged if all these people weren't on the call listening to us, and encouraged, I hope, by what we're saying. And I'm reading what you all are saying as well. And I think there's a greater awareness of these issues in any of the 47 years I've been working
on it. I'll jump in too. I think that there's, like Connor said, there's a lot of, we have the water that we need to survive and thrive. It's a question of how we use it. And it's a question of kind of what systems we put in place to best manage it in the public interest and as a human right. And a lot of things that Connor's talking about are things that, we need to implement. And we need to move from this industrial system to a more sustainable system. And so I guess I'm hopeful because I know that that's possible. And I'm also hopeful because, I'm continually inspired by what people are doing in their communities to achieve great wins against great odds. I mean, we see, pipelines being blocked effectively. We see power plants being shut down. We see people winning campaigns at the local level. We need to be, it gives us a level to build on. We don't have a lot of time, but we can do this. And we know we can do this based on all these victories that have come before us. So I guess I draw hope from all the great work that everybody's doing across the country and seeing some of those real results. And I'm also, like Connor, inspired by having so many people on this call, knowing that all of you all are going to continue to be engaged, and will engage more people as we move forward.
Thank you both so much. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. It's great to hear, that we do have, we know what we need to do. We know we have the resources. It's just a matter of managing them properly and with support from all of you here today, helping us further our work to protect our water, to protect our climate. We'll be able to achieve those goals. So I want to thank everyone for sending in all their great questions, and join me in the chat in giving a big round of applause to our panel for taking the time today to share their expertise with us on these issues, and for sharing ways that we can get involved and what keeps them energized to keep up this work. I also want to thank all of you again for joining. And like I said at the beginning, these are really complex issues and they're big systemic changes that we need to make. But as we've heard, we know that they're entirely possible. We know that grassroots organizing works and that we're going to keep building momentum, hopefully with your support. And so it's just so important to get involved in big ways and small, and make your voice heard on these issues. So, that can be something as simple as using the links we shared in the chat to send a message to your elected official. Or it could be taking the next step and joining one of our volunteer teams. As a food and water volunteer, you can help send texts or make calls to help mobilize people and mobilize more public support for these solutions. Or you can join local actions near you. I know Tomas mentioned some. If you're in LA, there's a rally next week for clean, renewable energy for the city. If you're in New Jersey, there are community events taking place all this week to tell the governor, that residents won't stand for continued fossil fuels. So, there are meetings and strategy sessions and rallies all over the country. And we post all of these opportunities on our Food and Water Network volunteer dashboard. So I encourage you to check that out. We'll put a link in the chat where you can see all of those upcoming opportunities that you can join. And if you can't find something near you, we have virtual opportunities that you can join from anywhere that you are in the country. Another thing that I'll mention is that you can also make a gift to Food and Water Watch to strengthen our campaigns to fight the fossil fuel industry and ban factory farms. It's your support that allows us to work at the local, state, and federal level to hold these industries accountable and really transform our systems to protect our food, our water, and our climate. So we'll share a link in the chat where you can make a donation, or you can also text the word gift to the number 23321. Finally, I do have one more resource that I want to share in the chat with you. My colleague Madeline will do that in just a moment. And it's an article that Mark actually published earlier this week that lays out a lot of what we just discussed and reiterates why we need to rethink our water management and really take on industrial agriculture and fossil fuels. And there's a link at the bottom of the article that you can share on social media. And it's a great way to spread the word and get more people involved. All right, so yeah, I just want to thank everyone so much for their time today, and to our speakers again for joining us for this conversation. Food and Water Watch is going to keep fighting no matter the odds, and we know that we can take on these corporations. So we thank you for all of your support in doing that. Later this afternoon, you'll get an email or a text message asking you to share some feedback about today's event. So I encourage you to fill that out or leave a comment. Your feedback is really helpful to us. And then later this week, we will share the recording for this conversation so that you can rewatch it, or you can share it with friends and family to, again, just keep spreading the word about these issues. So keep an eye out for that. So thank you all again, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thank you.